Let me get you a little to the right there. That's fine. That's good.
You want the hair down or in a ponytail? What do you want?
Well, how do you like it, baby?
The
Take it all off.
The
It's
thongs
fine.
come off.
Come on in, guys. My name is Delvis, and I'm the owner and designer of High Heat Outdoors. I'm from a small town in deep South Texas. I love the outdoors, but I especially love my wife, my son Lucas, and our boy Spider. I invite you to hang out with us as we clay shoot, meet up old friends, hunt, and fish. And how can we forget that food? Man, look at those tacos. So take in those sights and enjoy our crazy adventures along with us. And who knows, you might even learn a thing or two. You'll slowly get to know who I am as a father, an artist, and a businessman. We're so happy you're here, and welcome to High Heat Outdoors. This is a UTRGV visual arts building. And before it housed all of this talent, all of these dreams, all of these students, it used to be a Walmart. It was renovated a few years ago, and now it's where we're meeting our next guest. And if it hadn't been for the artist that we're about to meet right now, I would have never taken art as serious as I did. That was my sound check.
That was the thing at the
BSing just-
okay. That
yeah,
was sound
it's
check.
like, I can hear it. Yeah.
Ooh,
we're
you're
good.
clever. Okay.
All right, man. So let's start real quick by just introducing yourself.
I introduce myself?
Yes.
Okay. Hello. My name is Donald Jerry Lyles Jr. That's my whole name. Most people call me Jerry Lyles. My students call me Lyles or Professor Lyles. I am an associate professor of art at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley.
So what got you into this whole art thing?
Art thing.
What can you tell us about that?
I was born in 1968 here in Edinburg. I am a native, if you will. That is to say, I was born here. I've known that I wanted to be or was an artist since I was 5 years old. Now, that's one version of the story, okay? Somebody said artist, and I was a kid, and I didn't know even what that really was. I liked the sound of it. I knew I liked to draw. You know, I can remember the first tempera painting I ever made. And I must have been about 5 years old, and it was just very liberating and free form and, you know, all the things that kids do. Later, I was interested in the Italian Renaissance. And when I say later, I mean like 10, 11 years old. And that interest just began building. And then later in high school, I actually started taking art classes and got introduced to other periods of art history. French Impressionism made a big impression on me. I also got interested in comic books at the time and was always drawn to the illustration that I thought was stronger. You know, so figurative narrative illustration became a big component at that point in time. In fact, that was a field I was interested in going into when I was younger. Well, a friend of mine who was also a comic book collector, in fact, got me started, drew with pen and ink and advised me that I should give it a try. You know, do a pencil drawing and then ink it. That was sort of the standard practice at the time. And I got into it and I really liked it, and I've been drawing with pen and ink ever since. Just grown away from sequential narrative illustration, as it's called, or illustration. Gotten into some other avenues with that. But that was a big component. There was a brief period of time, I think my freshman year, ninth grade, where I entertained the possibility of being a medical doctor, you know, someday. I failed biology, so that pretty much took care of that. Much to my father's consternation, and that was part of it too. You know, the things you do when you're 14. But by the time I was out of high school, I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't quite know how to go about getting it done. You know, I wanted to study art. I wanted to become an artist. I wanted to make that my life. I didn't know quite at that point how I could do that and make a living. And I really, to be honest, when I look back and I see who I was then, I didn't have a clue. I didn't really have a clue what art was. You know, I thought I did because most 17-year-olds think they know everything, and I was no exception. But I didn't know anything. So it took a while. It took a while to kind of find my footing. I took some classes at, again, what was then Pan American University, later to become UTPA. The big turning point for me happened in 1990 when I went to the Chautauqua School of Art summer program. They have a summer program up there. And something about that summer, I was 22, I think, and I knew that something had to change, something had to shift, that it was an important moment in time for me and I needed to make some decisions. Turned in the application to go to the summer school, begged for money from my parents, particularly from my dad. He seemed to understand that that was a crossroads for me, and he coughed up the dough to go. And it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that expensive at the time. And it opened up my eyes in terms of what it meant to pursue painting, to be a serious art student, what was needed, what I needed to do, the level of commitment and involvement that was necessary for an art student to actually be productive and be functional and be successful. And, well, being an art student, basically. But I got up to, Chautauqua, by the way, is in Chautauqua County, New York, which is in the western portion of New York State. Buffalo is the nearest big city. It's right off of Chautauqua Lake, which is nearby one of the Great Lakes. I forget which one. It's a very well-respected summer arts program. And if you're an undergraduate student in particular in the visual arts, and particularly if you're a painter, I mean, I don't know if I think maybe the focus has shifted a little bit, but when I was going there, it was really focused on painting.
So we're talking about 1990.
1990, yeah.
Chautauqua. How did you even
How
hear about this program, right?
Okay.
It's not like you could just, hey, let me type up, art programs or residencies.
This was pre-internet.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell us about that.
There was a poster on the wall of the UTPA art department. We were UTPA by then, which is another story. And on the poster were these little postcards you could pull off and send in for information. You put on your name and address. It was already pre-postage paid, that sort of thing, and they would send you information. So I saw this poster and what's this? And I just pulled off one of those cards, filled it out, sent it in, and then they started sending me information through the mail. So thanks, Dad, borrowed the money or got the money, whatever the case may be, and went. But that's how I found out about it. In those days, post office was a big thing. It was an 8-week art boot camp, basically. I met 2 professors who would stay constants during my education. First one was the director of the program, Don Kimes, who was less of an influence in terms of art, but much more of an influence in terms of a model of a functioning art professor. In terms of art influence, at that point in time, Stanley Lewis, who was my professor that I studied under that summer, was a huge impact. And he was just a dynamic individual who was excited about painting and making the kind of painting I was interested in, direct observational landscape painting. He also had a very deep knowledge of the history of painting, was very much rooted in 20th century modernism, but from a perceptual experience. So he'd go outside and paint, but he also understood the inherent abstract nature of painting and would bring that into his teaching and into his own work. One of the things he would tell us was see the abstraction in nature. What you're doing when you're painting observationally, that means you're looking at something. You're actually directly referencing source material. You're looking at a space, you're looking at an object, and you're organizing your paint on the surface of the painting based on what you're looking at. That's what I mean by referential. It's also called perceptual. You're perceiving space, you're perceiving form. Form refers to the object, space refers to the environment that the object may be in. Okay. That's inherently an abstract proposition. You're taking a three-dimensional world, 4 dimensions if you want to include time, because things change over time. The Earth keeps rotating and the sun changes its position in our sky. And you're taking all of that wealth of information and trying to distill it onto a 2-dimensional surface. Okay? That is an abstract proposition. So even realistic painting is abstract because you're dealing with color, line, and shape on a flat surface, and you're trying to make that, in the case of representational painting, you're trying to make that look like what it is you're referencing, at least to some extent. Okay? So you're creating an illusion of depth or an illusion of form, and that's what it is. It's an illusion, because what you're really dealing with is line, shape, and value and color on a flat surface. And so you have people like Stanley Lewis who are directly responding to the landscape, but it comes from having been trained in abstraction. You have people like Don Kimes, who's also directly responding to landscape, at that time anyway, and yet his paintings were abstract. So he's cooking it down. He's dealing with abstraction directly, but his choices, his color choices or his color patterns are coming from his experience of the landscape. Stanley was more about the image, making an image, still dealing with space. And when we talk about space in painting, we're talking about 2 things. We're talking about the illusion of depth of field, things moving backward and forward in space. That comes straight out of the Renaissance, okay? And then there's the actual physical properties of the picture plane, what he called pictorial dynamics. So understanding space, how space works, how you can communicate space, how you can communicate depth of field or break up space is hugely important, not only as a painter, but in terms of camouflage design. You're not the only artist who's done this, by the way. There was an American artist named Abbott Thayer back at the turn of the 19th century, from late 19th, early 20th century, who had the idea that animals had the coloration they did because of natural selection, and their coloration allowed them to survive in the environment and how that worked. And he would make a series of paintings trying to prove his theories about naturally occurring camouflage that then got later interpreted into actual camouflage. The American Navy, U.S. Navy, used his ideas to pattern the naval ships, because they didn't have radar at the time. So you're in the field as a hunter, and you're wanting to blend into the background. Okay, your prey animal tends to see movement more than anything else. Okay. So again, that's why you need to sit still. But also, if your garb, if your dress can mirror the environment, in terms of how darks and lights are broken up, in terms of how, just the patterning, well, that's really what you're dealing with, value and shape. You have a better chance of not standing out. They can hear you, they can smell you, they have a heightened sense of awareness because they're dead if they don't. So if you can blend into the environment just by, you're breaking up your normal coloration of your clothing, and to my understanding, most prey animals are not, they don't have color vision in the same way we do necessarily. Not exactly. So again, you're dealing with pattern and value. When I talk about value, I'm talking about light and dark. Okay. So understanding how space works in the field, understanding how your average prey animal responds to their environment. Things that are vertical are a threat. Things that are horizontal, okay, everything's fine. So if you can break up your color patterns, because human beings tend to be in a vertical orientation, you can break that up so that you appear to be this, you're good. My father was a sportsman. He loved deer hunting, fishing, hunting. I grew up with him. He would go dove hunting, he'd go quail hunting, he'd go deer hunting, he'd go fishing, he'd disappear for a weekend, he'd be off down at Padre Island fishing, come home with, his catch, and that would turn into an anatomy lesson. Okay, like I said, he was a microbiology professor. He also taught scuba diving on the side. That was another passion of his. So dinner time quite often turned into, a lesson about zoology or the environment or something like that. But he was very much a sportsman. He grew up in North Louisiana, where most men, particularly of his age, generation, you hunted and you fished. That's what you did. They still do that over there. But Sportsman's capital. So that was his thing. He used to talk, in terms of what we were talking about with regards to camouflage, he just wore old army fatigues when he went out to the field. So that wasn't necessarily a big issue for him. But he was always the one about deer see movement, so be very deliberate about your movements. Deer don't tend to look up, so that's why the blind's up in the tree, And literally, my first blind was sitting on a wooden plank in a mesquite tree at 5 o'clock in the morning, freezing my tail off. But he used to say that the car door was an issue. You could open the door and the deer wouldn't spook, but when you closed it, if you weren't careful, if it made too much of a noise, they spooked to that and would run. He even made the notation or the observation, they didn't generally run when dry. Like he partnered on a deer lease that was adjacent to the King Ranch, actually, up near Redgate. And he would go on there in his truck. He had a small, I forget what make it was, probably a Chevy, but a small truck. And, he'd be driving around. The deer were accustomed to that. They were accustomed to what was then called fence runners. That's how the King protected its boundaries. They would have people that would just drive the line of the fence and make sure nobody was poaching on their land. This was before motion detector sensors and all of that. So the deer were accustomed to that. Plus then you had the rancher, the guy who owned the land. He was out on his land feeding his cows or tending to things or moving around. So that was not a problem for them. But that car door closing, if they heard that, boom, they'd run. So you have to be aware of what the animal, you have to be aware of what they're sensitive to. They don't like surprises. A loud metallic clank is a surprise to them.
After some time, we took a break, and I got to walk around my old stomping grounds. Heck, I used to even work here too, under the late great Professor Heisland. So let's get back to it and check out some of Lyles' work.
This is actually a spot that's right outside our building here. We're located, the Edinburg Visual Arts building is located in an old Walmart building that's owned by the university, and they converted it for our use. There's a lot just south of us right here, and adjacent to the street behind us, there's a small grove of mesquite trees, and this painting is part of that. When I say grove, I mean like there's about 5 or 6 mesquite trees clustered together. Mesquite trees are one of the subjects that show up in my painting a lot, not just because they're there, but because I like them. I'm responding to them. I think, I'm trying to say something about local ecology. And this is one of the trees out in the field.
How do you deal with a million branches on one tree,
right,
or a billion leaves?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you wrap your head around that?
I cook it down, for starters, because it is overwhelming. And one of the things that I think is helpful to avoid is trying to understand all of it. I'm not out there trying to meticulously record every little detail. I don't know if it's feasible, but I don't think it's productive. What I want is a general sense of what's happening in front of me. So reducing things down simply. What are the major components? And in this case, we're talking about blue sky, different types of oranges on the branches. Boom. This painting is of a wildflower, wildflowers, I should say. Indian paintbrush is the colloquial name of the species. And these were actually grown up in Goliad. You can find them all through South Texas during the spring months. They're seeded. You know, they are a naturally occurring species, but they're also seeded by the state. This also introduces another element to my process. Not everything is a direct on-location response. It's not really possible to do flower painting like this from direct observation. You know, you could do it that way, but it would be a different painting. It would just be handled differently. So what I did, or what I tend to do now as part of the process for these wildflower paintings, is I go out on location with my little cell phone camera and I just document. I take as many pictures as I possibly can under different lighting conditions. I bring those back to my my computer and I download them, and then I start looking at them. Okay, so this is a diptych. That is to say, it's two paintings or two surfaces that comprise one image. I actually inherited these canvases from a regional artist, a local artist, I'm not going to say who at this point in time, who passed away recently, relatively recently, and his family gave me these, and I decided to do something with them. The space involved here, this is actually a mesquite tree that is here in town over on Sprague and Pin Oak across from a park. The trees that are there, the mesquite trees that are there, used to be somebody's front yard. The lot used to be somebody's front yard. You can see the foundation for what was the house. And the trees are beautiful. They're mature. I would estimate they're at least 75 years old, 50 to 75 years old. At least that old. Because mesquite trees grow kind of slow, you know. I don't know who owns the lot. I suspect it's the city because they mow the grass that's there. But boy, I hope that this can stay. Now this is an issue, and it's kind of what I was trying to talk about before. The city comes in, or a commercial developer comes in, or a real estate developer comes in, and they cut down the old growth trees. This is a mistake. It's a mistake in terms of ecology. It's a mistake in terms of value to the land. You know, when you have an old growth tree on your property, especially if it's say a housing development, you know, that's a value. That adds value to the property. And I know that for a fact because the county has recently raised my property taxes, and it's partially in response to what I've done with my yard. And we're talking about that the derogatory attitude that prevails towards native flora. And yet, when we have a property that's got old mesquite trees on it, and people talk about, oh, it's so pretty. Oh, yeah. Really? Really? Then why don't you leave them alone and let them grow?
You're probably thinking to yourself, what the heck does an artist have to do with high heat outdoors? What does this have to do with hunting, with fishing, that sort of outdoorsman stuff? I mean, what does it really have to do? Well, it's the land. It's all about the land. It's what connects us all. Lyles was born here. So was I. We're connected to this land forever, whether we like it or not, and it's home. And we appreciate it for its beauty. We appreciate it for taking care of us, for providing for us. I asked Lyles if he would take me out to the cluster of trees that he had been painting, and he obliged. We got to talking, catching up a little bit. One thing you have to know about artists is that the conversation can go anywhere, from art history to botany, or in this case, pumpkins.
The popular cultural view of pumpkins is Halloween, right? And you think about Halloween and New England and all of that stuff, and I don't know. That's only the tip of the iceberg. Pumpkins come from this part of the world, okay? Southern United States down into Mexico. Pumpkins are an indigenous, the gourd in general is an indigenous agricultural product. The Indians in pre-Columbian times raised them, squash, gourds of various kinds, and the oldest known gourd seeds that archaeology has found come from Oaxaca. 5,000 years old. 5,000 years old, folks. 5,000 years old from Oaxaca. And yet in the United States, we think about jack-o'-lanterns and New England and all of that stuff. No, no, no. That's from the cultural roots of that product are much older and come from much further south than is generally appreciated.
The sun was setting, and it was time to go. I chatted with Lyles a little bit more, and we said our goodbyes. For now, anyway. But thanks again, man. Be sure and visit www.djlylesart.com. And visit us, High Heat Outdoors, on all your social media platforms. And look us up at www.buromesquite.com. Intro music by Jaime Cisneros at JSIC81.